Welcome to Champion Stories. If this is your first time here, subscribe now and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And now, on to today's story. The neon lights of Las Vegas Boulevard flickered against the tinted windows of the black limousine as it glided through the desert night. Inside, Manny Pacquiao sat in contemplative silence, his calloused hands resting on his knees, still bearing the faint marks of athletic tape that had been carefully removed hours earlier. The biggest paycheck of his career lay folded in the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket, a sum so substantial it felt almost surreal against his chest. The MGM Grand had been electric that evening. 80,000 screaming fans had witnessed another chapter in boxing history, their voices creating a thunderous symphony that still echoed in Manny's ears. Camera flashes had burst like lightning throughout the arena, capturing every moment of his victory, every drop of sweat that glistened under the harsh spotlights. The roar of the crowd had been deafening when the final bell rang, but now, in the quiet luxury of the limousine, a different kind of noise filled his mind. As the vehicle turned toward the airport, Manny's thoughts drifted away from the glittering casino towers and back to a place thousands of miles away. He could almost smell the humid air of General Santos City, feel the rough concrete beneath his bare feet as he had run through those familiar streets as a child. The contrast between his current surroundings and those early memories created an ache in his chest that no amount of money could ease. The leather seats of the limousine were more comfortable than any bed he had slept in during his childhood, yet they felt foreign against his skin. Through the window, he watched the endless stream of luxury cars and limousines, carrying other wealthy patrons to their destinations. Each vehicle represented a world of privilege that he now belonged to, yet somehow felt separate from. The weight of success, he had learned, was heavier than the weight of poverty in ways he had never expected. His phone vibrated softly against the leather seat. Messages of congratulations flooded his screen, from promoters, celebrities, and business associates who spoke of endorsement deals and investment opportunities. Each notification represented another zero added to his already substantial fortune, another door opening to possibilities he had once only imagined. Yet as he scrolled through the messages, none of them carried the warmth he craved. The limousine slowed as they approached McCarran International Airport, where his private jet waited on the tarmac. The pilot, a professional man named Angelo who had flown him to several fights, stood ready to take him anywhere in the world. The luxury of choice stretched before him like an endless buffet of possibilities. He could fly to any exotic destination, purchase any material possession, or invest in any venture that caught his interest. But as Manny stepped out of the limousine and felt the cool desert air against his face, his decision had already crystallized in his mind. The enormous paycheck in his pocket would not be spent on mansions or luxury cars. It would not be invested in stocks or business ventures that would multiply his wealth. Instead, it would serve a purpose that would surprise everyone who thought they understood what success meant to a man who had risen from nothing. The jet engines hummed to life as Manny settled into his seat, his destination clear in his mind. He was going home, not to celebrate his victory or to display his newfound wealth, but to honor a promise he had made to himself long before the world knew his name. The private jet soared through the darkness above the Pacific Ocean, its cabin bathed in soft amber lighting that cast gentle shadows across the plush interior. Manny had declined the champagne offered by Rosario, the flight attendant, choosing instead to sip slowly from a bottle of water as he gazed out at the endless expanse of ocean below. Each mile that passed beneath the aircraft carried him further from the glittering world of Las Vegas and closer to the humid embrace of his homeland. Sleep eluded him despite the comfortable reclining seat that could easily transform into a bed. His mind was too active, too filled with memories that the victory had stirred from the depths of his consciousness. The check in his pocket seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour, not because of its physical weight, but because of the responsibility it represented. Money, he had learned, was never just money. It was opportunity, obligation, and in many cases, a test of character. As the jet crossed international waters, Manny found himself remembering the taste of rice mixed with salt that had sustained him through countless hungry nights as a child. He could almost feel the worn pages of the school books he had shared with his siblings, the ink smudged from countless hands that had passed them around their impoverished neighborhood. Those textbooks had been treasures more valuable than gold, representing hope and possibility in a world that offered little of either. The flight attendant moved quietly through the cabin, adjusting the temperature and ensuring his comfort, but Manny barely noticed her presence. His thoughts had traveled back to a small classroom in General Santos City, where Mrs. Ligaya had taught mathematics to overcrowded classes of children whose parents could barely afford their school uniforms. She had been more than a teacher. She had been a beacon of hope who had seen potential in students that society had already written off. The memory of her weathered hands, writing equations on a cracked blackboard, brought an unexpected tightness to his throat. Mrs. Ligaya had used her own meager salary to buy supplies for students who couldn't afford them, never asking for recognition or gratitude. She had simply given day after day, believing that education could lift children out of poverty even when the odds seemed impossible. Manny shifted in his seat and pulled out his phone, scrolling through recent photos from his last visit home. The images showed the same narrow streets he had run through as a barefoot child, the same corrugated metal roofs that had leaked during monsoon seasons, the same faces marked by struggle but brightened by resilience. Progress had come slowly to his neighborhood, and many families still lived in conditions that would shock the wealthy patrons who had cheered for him in Las Vegas. The jet's engines hummed steadily as they began their descent toward Manila. Through the small window, the first hints of dawn painted the horizon in shades of orange and pink that reminded him of the sunrises he had watched while training on the streets of his youth. Those early morning runs had been born of necessity, not luxury. The only time when the roads were clear enough for a poor boy to practice his footwork without dodging traffic or crowds. As the aircraft prepared for landing, Manny carefully touched the check in his pocket one final time. The amount printed on that piece of paper could change hundreds of lives, could provide opportunities that would ripple through generations. The question that had kept him awake during the flight was not whether he should share his fortune, but how to do it in a way that would honor both his success and his origins. The wheels touched down on Philippine soil with a gentle bump, and Manny felt something deep in his chest settle into place. He was home, carrying with him not just the spoils of victory, but a plan that would surprise everyone who thought they understood what mattered most to the fighting pride of the Philippines. The humidity of Manila hit Manny like a warm embrace as he stepped off the private jet. The familiar scent of tropical air mixed with diesel exhaust and street food filled his lungs, replacing the sterile coolness of the aircraft cabin. Despite the early morning hour, a small crowd had gathered at the private terminal, word of his arrival having somehow leaked despite his team's efforts to keep the trip quiet. Isagani, his longtime security coordinator, moved efficiently through the crowd of reporters and well-wishers, creating a respectful buffer between Manny and those hoping for interviews or photographs. The questions shouted by journalists echoed across the tarmac, inquiries about his next fight, his celebration plans, and how he intended to spend his record-breaking purse. Manny acknowledged them with polite waves, but offered no answers, his mind already focused on the journey ahead. The drive through Manila's congested streets provided a stark reminder of the economic disparities that defined his country. Gleaming shopping malls and luxury hotels stood mere blocks away from sprawling informal settlements where families lived in structures cobbled together from salvaged materials. Children weaved between stopped cars at traffic lights, selling bottled water and newspapers to earn money for their families. Daily meals. Each face reminded Manny of his own childhood, when every peso had meant the difference between eating and going hungry. As their convoy headed south toward General Santos City, the urban landscape gradually gave way to rural provinces where life moved at a different pace. Rice paddies stretched toward distant mountains, their emerald surfaces reflecting the morning sky like mirrors. Farmers worked their fields with the same tools their fathers and grandfathers had used, their backs bent under the weight of honest labor that yielded modest harvests and even more modest incomes. Manny watched a group of children walking along the roadside, their school uniforms clean but clearly well worn, their backpacks patched where the fabric had torn. They moved with the easy camaraderie of friendship forged by shared circumstances, laughing and talking as they made their way to a school building that appeared in the distance. The structure was small and weathered, its concrete walls stained by countless monsoon seasons, its windows lacking glass in several places. The sight triggered a flood of memories from his own school days. He remembered the excitement of learning despite the challenges, sitting on hard wooden benches, sharing textbooks with 3 other students, and listening to teachers who made magic happen with limited resources. Education had been a luxury that many families in his neighborhood couldn't afford, and those who managed to send their children to school did so through tremendous sacrifice. His thoughts turned to the check still resting in his jacket pocket. The amount represented more money than most Filipino families would see in several lifetimes, yet Manny knew that money alone wasn't enough to create lasting change. True transformation required vision, planning, and a deep understanding of what communities actually needed, rather than what outsiders assumed they needed. As they passed through small towns where vendors sold fresh fruit from roadside stalls and elderly men gathered in the shade to play dominoes, Manny felt the weight of opportunity settling on his shoulders. His success in the ring had given him more than financial rewards. It had given him a platform and the resources to make a difference in places that rarely saw such possibilities. The familiar landmarks of his home region began to appear outside the window. Each curve in the road brought him closer to the community that had shaped him, the place where his transformation from street-smart survivor to world champion had begun. Soon he would be face to face with the people who had believed in him before the world knew his name, and he would finally be able to share the surprise that had been growing in his heart since the moment that enormous check had been placed in his hands. The familiar skyline of General Santos City emerged through the morning haze as their convoy approached the outskirts of Manny's hometown. The modest buildings and busy streets held none of the glamour of Las Vegas or Manila, but they possessed something far more valuable to him: authenticity. This was where his story had truly begun, not in the bright lights of championship arenas, but in the dusty roads and cramped neighborhoods where dreams seemed impossible, yet somehow survived. As they entered the city proper, Manny instructed his driver to take a detour through his old neighborhood. The familiar sights unfolded outside his window like pages from a well-worn photo album. The small convenience store, where he had bought single cigarettes to sell individually for profit, still stood on the corner, its hand-painted sign now more faded but still legible. Children kicked a makeshift soccer ball in the same vacant lot where he had once shadowboxed against imaginary opponents, their laughter echoing off the surrounding walls of corrugated metal and concrete. The convoy slowed as they navigated the narrow streets that had never been designed for vehicles of this size. Curious faces appeared in doorways and windows, word spreading quickly through the neighborhood that their most famous son had returned home. Unlike the aggressive crowds in Manila, these people maintained a respectful distance, their expressions mixing pride with genuine affection. These were the faces that had watched him grow up, that had witnessed his earliest struggles and celebrated his first small victories. Manny spotted Benilda hanging laundry in front of her small house, the same woman who had lived 3 doors down from his family when he was a child. Her hair was now completely grey, and her movements slower than he remembered, but her smile remained as warm as ever when she recognized him through the tinted window. She had been among the neighbors who had occasionally shared food with his family during the hardest times, never making a show of her generosity, but simply appearing with a pot of rice or vegetables when they were needed most. The car passed the elementary school where his educational journey had begun, and Manny felt his heart tighten with emotion. The building looked smaller than his childhood memories suggested, its walls in need of fresh paint, and its playground equipment worn from years of use by countless children. Through the chain-link fence, he could see students in their simple uniforms attending their morning classes, their voices drifting across the courtyard as they recited lessons in unison. This was where the plan that had been forming in his mind since Las Vegas would finally take shape. The enormous check in his pocket represented more than personal wealth. It represented the power to transform the educational landscape of his community in ways that would impact generations of children. But Manny knew that simply throwing money at problems rarely created lasting solutions. Real change required careful planning, community involvement, and a deep understanding of local needs. As they approached his childhood home, now transformed but still recognizably the place where his family had struggled and dreamed together, Manny felt the full weight of his responsibility settling into his bones. The success he had achieved belonged not just to him, but to everyone who had believed in an unlikely dream. His victories in the ring had been individual accomplishments, but the opportunity to give back was a collective responsibility that connected him to his roots in the most meaningful way possible. The convoy finally stopped in front of a modest building that served as a community center, where several local leaders had gathered to welcome him home. Among them stood Clarita, his former elementary school principal, now retired but still actively involved in educational initiatives throughout the city. Her presence confirmed what Manny had suspected. Word of his intentions had somehow preceded him, and the community was ready to help him turn his unprecedented generosity into something truly transformative. The community center's simple concrete walls had witnessed countless meetings over the years, discussions about neighborhood improvements, school fundraisers, and local concerns that required collective action. But today, the atmosphere carried an electricity that was different from any previous gathering. The presence of their most celebrated native son had transformed the modest space into something that felt almost sacred, a place where dreams might finally have the resources to become reality. Manny entered the room with the same humility that had characterized his interactions with this community throughout his rise to fame. Despite the expensive suit and the obvious markers of his success, he moved with the easy familiarity of someone who belonged here, someone whose roots ran deeper than any amount of money could ever change. The dozen community leaders who had assembled represented decades of dedicated service to their neighbors, their faces bearing the wisdom that came from years of working with limited resources to address unlimited needs. Clarita stepped forward with the natural authority of someone who had spent her career guiding young minds toward better futures. Her eyes held the same mixture of pride and expectation that Manny remembered from his school days, when she had seen potential in a restless boy that others might have dismissed as trouble. Age had silvered her hair and lined her face, but her passion for education burned as brightly as ever, evident in the way she carried herself and the intelligence that sparkled in her gaze. The meeting began with the quiet respect that marked important occasions in Filipino culture. Teodoro, a longtime community organizer who had coordinated countless local initiatives, reviewed the educational challenges that continued to face their region. Overcrowded classrooms, insufficient teaching materials, outdated facilities, and the ongoing struggle to keep children in school rather than working to support their families. These problems had persisted for generations, seemingly immune to the modest improvements that limited budgets could provide. As the discussion continued, Manny listened with the intensity he had once reserved for studying opponents before major fights. Marilu, a young teacher who had recently joined the local elementary school, described the daily challenges of educating 60 children in a classroom designed for 30 using textbooks that were falling apart from decades of use. Her dedication was evident in every word, but so was her frustration with a system that demanded miracles from educators while providing them with inadequate tools. The moment had come for Manny to reveal the plan that had crystallized during his long flight home. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew the check that represented his Las Vegas victory, placing it carefully on the table where everyone could see the amount that had made headlines around the world. The silence that followed was profound, filled with the weight of possibility and the recognition that this piece of paper could change everything they had been discussing. But Manny's intentions went far beyond simply writing a large donation check. His vision encompassed a comprehensive transformation of the local educational infrastructure. New school buildings equipped with modern technology, libraries filled with current textbooks, scholarship programs that would allow talented students to pursue higher education regardless of their families, economic circumstances, and teacher training initiatives that would attract and retain the best educators in the region. The surprise that would shock the boxing world and international media was not just the size of his generosity, but the strategic thoughtfulness behind it. This was not a spontaneous gesture or a publicity stunt, but a carefully planned investment in human potential that addressed root causes rather than symptoms. The community leaders in the room began to understand that they were witnessing the birth of something unprecedented, a systematic approach to educational transformation that could serve as a model for similar initiatives throughout the Philippines. The weight of silence that followed Manny's revelation seemed to stretch through eternity, though it lasted only moments. The check lay on the worn wooden table, like a promise made tangible, its printed numbers representing more money than the combined annual budgets of every school in the region. But the true power of the moment lay not in the astronomical figure, but in the recognition that their community's most successful son was prepared to invest his greatest victory in their shared future. Ernesto, whose weathered hands had built countless small improvements throughout the neighborhood over the past 30 years, leaned forward to study the check more closely. His expression reflected the cautious optimism of someone who had seen too many grand promises fade into disappointment, yet couldn't quite suppress the hope that this time might be different. The construction supervisor had witnessed decades of well-meaning initiatives that had started with enthusiasm, but crumbled due to inadequate funding or poor planning. Clarita's eyes moved from the check to Manny's face, searching for confirmation that this extraordinary gesture represented genuine commitment rather than spontaneous charity. What she saw there satisfied her concerns. The same determination that had carried him through countless boxing matches, the same methodical approach that had transformed a street fighter into a strategic champion. This was not impulse, this was purpose, refined by careful thought and powered by unlimited resources. The discussion that followed revealed the depth of planning that Manny had already undertaken during his journey home. His vision encompassed not just new buildings and equipment, but a comprehensive reimagining of how education could serve the community's needs. Amihan, a mathematics teacher who had struggled for years with insufficient calculators and outdated textbooks, found herself being consulted about classroom design and technology integration in ways that made her feel like a valued professional rather than an overlooked civil servant. Julian, whose small construction company had handled maintenance work for local schools, listened with growing amazement as Manny outlined specifications for educational facilities that would rival those found in wealthy urban districts. Solar panels for reliable electricity, computer laboratories with high-speed internet connections, libraries designed to accommodate both traditional books and digital resources, and science laboratories equipped for hands-on experimentation rather than theoretical study alone. But perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of Manny's plan was his emphasis on community ownership and sustainability. Rather than simply building new schools and walking away, he envisioned creating an educational foundation that would generate ongoing revenue through strategic investments, ensuring that improvements could be maintained and expanded over time. Scholarship programs would be funded in perpetuity, teacher salaries would be supplemented to attract top talent, and continuing education opportunities would keep instructors current with evolving pedagogical methods. Herminia, whose 3 decades of organizing parent-teacher associations had given her intimate knowledge of family struggles, raised practical concerns about implementation. How would they ensure that improved facilities translated into better student outcomes? How would they address the economic pressures that forced many children to work instead of attending school? How would they measure success beyond standardized test scores? These questions demonstrated exactly why Manny had chosen to work with community leaders rather than implementing his vision unilaterally. Their intimate understanding of local challenges and cultural dynamics would be essential for creating sustainable change. The check on the table was just the beginning. The real work would require collaboration, patience, and the kind of long-term commitment that championship boxing had taught him to value. As the afternoon sun slanted through the community center's windows, the outline of an unprecedented educational transformation began to take concrete shape. Phone calls were made to additional stakeholders, preliminary timelines were sketched on whiteboards, and the first steps toward turning vision into reality were carefully planned. The surprise that would astonish the world was not just happening, it was being built with the same methodical precision that had made Manny Pacquiao a global champion. Word of Manny's unprecedented gift spread through General Santos City like ripples across still water, each conversation carrying the news to another household, another family, another dreamer who had never imagined such possibilities. By evening, the community center had transformed into an impromptu gathering place where neighbors came to witness history in the making, their faces illuminated by the same hope that had once seemed impossible in their modest circumstances. Socorro arrived clutching the hand of her 8-year-old daughter, both of them still wearing the simple clothes they had put on for what they thought would be an ordinary day. The single mother had cleaned houses and sold vegetables in the market for years to afford her daughter's school supplies, often going without meals herself to ensure the child could continue learning. The news that scholarships and improved schools were not just dreams but approaching realities brought tears to her eyes that she tried unsuccessfully to hide. The local marketplace buzzed with conversations that mixed disbelief with growing excitement. Basilio, who had operated a small variety store for 3 decades, found himself at the center of discussions about how the educational improvements might transform the entire community's economic prospects. Families who had resigned themselves to cycles of poverty began imagining futures where their children could pursue careers that required advanced education, where talent and ambition would no longer be constrained by economic circumstances. Young Letitia, a high school student whose academic excellence had been recognized despite her family's inability to afford tutoring or supplemental materials, heard about the scholarship programs with the kind of wonder reserved for miracles. She had been preparing to abandon her dreams of becoming an engineer to help support her siblings, but now those dreams flickered back to life with an intensity that made her hands tremble as she helped her grandmother prepare dinner. The evening brought an unexpected procession of visitors to the community center, each person carrying their own story of educational struggle and deferred dreams. Teachers who had spent their own salaries on classroom supplies, parents who had worked multiple jobs to keep their children in school, and students who had excelled despite overwhelming disadvantages, all of them came to understand that their collective struggles had not gone unnoticed by someone with the power to create meaningful change. Florencio, whose weathered hands had built many of the neighborhood's modest homes, stood quietly in the back of the growing crowd. At 73, he had lived through enough false promises to maintain healthy skepticism about grand announcements. But as he watched Manny interact with community members with the same respectful attention he showed to world leaders and celebrities, the old man began to believe that this time might truly be different. The logistics of transformation continued to unfold throughout the evening as architects, contractors, and educational consultants were contacted by phone to begin preliminary assessments. The scope of the project expanded as community input revealed needs that hadn't been initially apparent: specialized programs for children with learning disabilities, adult literacy classes for parents who had never had educational opportunities, and vocational training that would provide immediate economic benefits while longer-term academic improvements took root. Local churches announced special prayer services to give thanks for what many considered a divine blessing delivered through human generosity. The parish priest, Father Miguel, who had watched countless talented young people leave the community in search of opportunities that didn't exist locally, began planning ways that religious organizations could support and amplify the educational initiatives. As night settled over General Santos City, the community center remained brightly lit, its windows glowing like a beacon of possibility in the surrounding darkness. Inside, the detailed planning continued with the methodical thoroughness that had characterized every aspect of Manny's professional career. Charts and timelines covered the walls, contact lists grew longer by the hour, and the foundation of an educational transformation that would surprise the entire world was being laid with care, precision, and unwavering commitment to the people who had shaped a champion's heart. 6 months after that transformative evening in the community center, the world finally understood what Manny Pacquiao had done with his record-breaking Las Vegas paycheck. International news crews arrived in General Santos City to document what educational experts were calling the most comprehensive private investment in rural Philippine education in the country's history. The story that emerged surprised even those who thought they knew the champion's character. The first new school building rose from what had once been an empty lot, its modern architecture incorporating sustainable design principles with traditional Filipino aesthetics. Solar panels gleamed on the roof, while large windows allowed natural light to flood classrooms, equipped with technology that most urban schools could only dream of having. Violeta, a recent education graduate who had been recruited from Manila, with a salary package that made teaching financially viable, stood in her new science laboratory, surrounded by equipment that would allow her students to conduct experiments they had previously only read about in outdated textbooks. The scholarship program had already transformed dozens of young lives. Aurelio, a brilliant 17-year-old whose mathematical aptitude had been recognized but never properly nurtured, found himself enrolled in an accelerated program that would prepare him for engineering studies at the University of the Philippines. His mother, Esperanza, who had cleaned offices at night to support his education, now watched her son work on advanced calculus problems in a tutoring center that provided free academic support to any student who needed it. International media coverage focused not just on the financial magnitude of Manny's gift, but on the strategic sophistication of its implementation. Harvard Business School requested case study materials about the project's community-driven planning process. UNESCO representatives visited to observe how the initiative balanced modern educational methods with respect for local culture and values. The story became required reading in development economics courses at universities around the world. But for the residents of General Santos City, the true measure of success wasn't found in academic papers or news reports. It was visible in the confident posture of children walking to schools where they knew they belonged, in the pride of parents who could now imagine their children pursuing careers they had never dared to dream possible, and in the renewed sense of community purpose that came from being part of something unprecedented. Celestino, the veteran educator who had been chosen to oversee the integrated school system, often stood in the main courtyard during morning assemblies, watching hundreds of students whose futures had been fundamentally altered by one man's decision to honor his origins. The children wore new uniforms purchased through the Foundation's clothing program, carried modern textbooks that belonged to them rather than being shared among multiple students, and moved between classes with the confidence that came from knowing their education was valued and supported. The financial impact extended far beyond education. Local contractors had been hired for construction projects, creating jobs that strengthened the entire community's economy. Teachers from other regions relocated to accept positions that offered professional respect and adequate compensation. Small businesses flourished as families with improved prospects increased their spending on goods and services that had previously been considered luxuries. As evening settled over the community, Manny often walked through the neighborhoods where he had learned life's hardest lessons. The streets looked different now, not because of dramatic physical changes, but because they carried the energy of possibility. Children still played in the same vacant lots, but their games now included discussions of future careers in medicine, engineering, and law. Parents still gathered to share concerns about their families, but those conversations increasingly focused on opportunities rather than limitations. The surprise that had shocked the world was not just that a champion fighter had given away his largest purse, but that he had done so with a vision that would multiply its impact across generations. In transforming the educational landscape of his hometown, Manny Pacquiao had created something far more valuable than any championship belt. He had built a legacy that would continue fighting for dreams long after his final bout was forgotten. Thank you for watching another episode of Champion Stories. If you enjoyed today's story, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming inspiring tales about Manny Pacquiao. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one, and many times your ideas inspire our next episode. See you next time.